I asked our friends at EcoStrategies to go and give me a sense of all the articles in the past 2 years on oil extraction, oil transportation, and then go and do an analysis on energy efficiency on every sector. In 2 years, there was over 13,000 articles on crude oil, 1,400 on energy efficiency. So it really talks about the national dialogue. And I want to hear from the panel and the panelists on competing spaces. What's happening within your areas, what you need to compete with to be successful, to move that yardstick forward, and how do we address this culture shift from this findings that we've got this morning? And I'm going to go start it off with Roger.
Well, as I said, within the bank, energy competes for attention with everything. So every agenda the bank has, it's competing for airspace, for dollars, for people's attention. And I think what it takes, I think this would also tie in with the race to reduce success stories. It takes champions, it takes leaders. I think the culture shift you're talking about, it was one of the other points I wanted to make when I was speaking earlier. One of the second reasons people don't pursue energy initiatives or energy saving initiatives is their preference not to do it. And I think that's because there isn't enough leadership, there isn't enough champions, there isn't enough people just absolutely saying this is the right thing to do and you've got to move ahead. I will tell you that within our bank, one person in 2008, one of our senior executives, literally turned the bank on its ear and said this is going to be an initiative for us, and then drove it to the point where it is now part of our brand. I think that's what it takes in order to move this agenda further. More champions, more people just out there being apostles of what needs to be done and why. I think sometimes the fragmentation within this industry works against us because there are so many things coming at it, confuses people. So to some extent, simplifying that. But leadership and champions are, in my mind, where it is.
Great, thank you. Andrew, is this Mission Impossible?
Yeah, exactly. That was yesterday's expression. May the fourth be with you. Yeah. Is it Mission Impossible? No, absolutely not. It's mission happening. I mean, we're seeing it out there all the time. We just don't talk about it. Right, I think that feeds into the equation. We just don't talk about the successes that we've had. And when you look at competition for capital, or you look for competition for whatever the competition is in any organization, it's that promotion that tends to push it over the edge. It's that aspect of we did well, and here's why we did well, and we're backing it up with solid numbers. So I'm not sure. I'm positive it's not Mission Impossible. I'm positive that it's happening out there, and I think we're seeing. More, and I think the more we see energy champions out there, or social champions, or whatever you want to call them, that are driving energy efficiency, we're going to see it. I mean, certainly in my past life, that was what I did, and it works. It is an incredibly tiresome function for someone to do that. When they start seeing the success and the promotion, then all of a sudden it works, and it's no longer Mission Impossible because everyone else wants to get on board. So it's a momentum that needs to build, and it can't stop. We've seen in a number of organizations where they bring up an individual, they have a champion, they start to have some initial success, and then they remove the champion saying, okay, we're there, but they need to maintain that momentum throughout. And that's super important, and we can't lose vision to that. So I think it's the champion and sustaining that champion and that champion's mission that will keep this very much in the possible realm.
Thank you. Carol, we are a resource nation base. There's no getting around that, and that's a good thing. I think it was Brian Mulrooney who said recently, sometimes we feel like we were born on third base and we seem like we hit a triple. So I pose to you, from mining, from resource development, how do you compete in that space for energy efficiency and keep it at the front burner?
Okay, now you threw a baseball analogy at me, and I think it's been established that I curl. So I'm not gonna pick you up on that one because it's too unfamiliar to me. But getting back in the house where I feel more comfortable. How do we compete in that space? Well, I've sort of got two answers for that because I try to compete every single day in a department where, you know, we manage the energy issues federally, and you can open the newspaper or listen to the radio. I mean, it's just energy is always important to this country, but it has become just a pervasive, overwhelming issue with respect to getting markets for our resources and getting them out of the ground and addressing the consultation and environmental challenges therein. So that's just an enormous challenge for this country and for my department. And so I'm on the responsible energy use side of energy, and it is important to ensure that it gets attention too. So I try hard to make sure that energy efficiency gets its share of space. But out in the economy, I think a lot about the role of the Government of Canada, because there are so many of you in this room who work in this industry, and those of my fellow panelists here who also occupy spaces here. And the thing that I don't want to do, coming from our perspective in the federal government, is to duplicate anything that is happening out there or that is better placed to be handled by others in the economy. So I'm thinking of utilities, for example, who have a one-on-one relationship with the energy user. Well, there's things that the Government of Canada ought not be trying to do, because those are so much more effective to be done by utilities who have that one-on-one relationship with their customers. Other things make sense for provinces or municipalities to do just because of the levers that they have, whether it's building codes or zoning for how a city is arranged, transportation and so forth. So the thing that we try and do to get into that space is to do the most appropriate thing for our level of government, which thinking of our jurisdictional responsibility for countrywide standards, for example, we occupy that space, and also putting tools in the economy that others can then build upon. Energy Star's a good example where, I don't know, 30 or so provinces and utilities are building their programs on top of that. I've got other examples, but I think that would give you the idea of where we try and compete.
Thank you for your comments. Well, let's go to the utilities. Darren, what's your challenge sometimes on competing spaces when you're dealing with the end user?
I think there's almost an element, you know, we've talked a lot about communication and the need to do better for the customer, educate them more. I think there were excellent examples, you know, across the table here. And I can't help but feel like part of it, part of it you talked about, you know, a culture change, and I think part of it is, you know, competing against the status quo. You know, we've been, you know, both Enbridge and Union and electric utilities, we've now been at delivering energy efficiency for quite some time. And there's an established, you know, way of doing things. And I'd say we've taken sort of the hard approach, right? The engineering oriented approach where, you know, when we install a new measure, you know, whether we may not measure the impacts of that, but we know, you know, we'll do our engineering calculations and we'll know the average impact that a measure like that happens. And, you know, a lot of what we've talked about here today has been, you know, I'd say the softer side of things, communicating. And so, you know, I think in terms of competing, we need to sort of, you know, implement these new ways of delivering energy efficiency. So one of the things we're going to move forward with is, I'm sure a lot of people in the room may have heard of O-Power. We're going to move forward with a small scale program with O-Power where we shift some of our energy efficiency resources towards behavior and education, and really helping both home and business owners help them understand, you know, how much energy they use and how do they look like versus, you know, the best homes that are comparable to them. So I think in terms of competing, it's how do we get away from the status quo, the ways that we've always been doing things, and experiment with new things.
Thank you. Katrina, you represent corporate Canada. Tell us about the challenges that we face as an industry in energy efficiency to get on the top of your top 10 list.
Oh, to get on the top 10 list, well, I just think for the Canadian Chamber, every year they do this top 10 barriers to competitiveness, where we talk to our members, we hear about what their challenges are, and that makes it into the top 10 list. So I think it's just a matter of talking to us, letting us know, the Chamber, that this is actually a matter for business. But I think one of the barriers maybe for corporate Canada is that energy efficiency is just one of a suite of responses that could be made to higher energy costs. If you're a manufacturer, a global manufacturer, energy starts rising in one jurisdiction, you always have the option of moving to a jurisdiction where energy costs are lower, rather than perhaps making the investments in making your current facilities more efficient. If you don't have that option, maybe you have the option of building your own generation facilities, which happens often in the forest product sector. They use their waste to generate power, and that becomes an additional revenue stream for them. So there's different options that responses companies could have. I just would want to add that I always hear a lot about education and communication as being a way forward. I have to admit that I'm somewhat of a skeptic about that. I think that sometimes there's a tendency to have, the right solution for the wrong problem, and then we think the solution is to go out and tell people that they actually have this problem, whereas they think they might actually have a different problem. So maybe a prior step could be listening, understanding what people's priorities are, and then adapting the programs to that. I think the UK had a really great example. They have this nudge division. It's this behavioral analysis division where they go and they try to figure out ways to tweak people's behavior. They had, I think it was an energy efficiency program where they wanted to get more insulations in roofs, but people weren't uptaking on the program. So they went out and they tried to figure out why. What was the barrier? And it turned out people didn't want to clean their attics. So they weren't signing up for the program because that would mean they would have to clean their attics. So what they did is they offered free attic cleaning service if you signed up for this program. And I think the rates started to go up. So I think listening rather than just communicating to what people's actual priorities and problems are.